All right, it's Jeff Mayhew, it's John Beatty, it's Politics and Parenting, where we talk about politics, but we talk about it differently. John, how are you doing?
Jeff, you may have noticed I haven't shown up for the past 2 weeks. I hope you'll forgive me. 2 Sundays ago, we welcomed to the world a brand new baby number 7, and he looks not at all like me because well, some features, but he's got bright blonde hair and a lot of it, and we'll see. End up being pretty tall. So um, I've been kind of hunkering down, basically taking care of everyone else. Now that school's out, the pool's open, so we've been going to the pool during nap time with the older children. They absolutely love that. So it's just been a joy welcoming yet another not future, he is a citizen, a future voter to the fold. And I guess I came back just enough time because we're here tonight to welcome Nic Rowan, who writes. I guess I'm sorry. Katie was asking me about this. I believe you're the executive editor, and so I told her I think that's the editor who does all the work and gets all the credit,
the
less of the credit.
the title's managing editor.
Managing editor.
But it's the same thing where
Yeah.
like you're the one who has to run things on a day-to-day basis and appear lower on the masthead. Which is good. I'm not the ideas guy.
Well, welcome. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We appreciate it. You wrote 2 articles that we want to talk about. One of them is kind of topical because it's about Robert Hanssen, who recently just passed away. But the first one is about Marianne Williamson and her second run for presidency. So she's not the only one who's retreading old ground. And I think some of the points you try to make in the article is that she's bringing kind of a new tact to what she's saying. So it seems like she's saying a lot of the same ideas. I think you mentioned that she's basically recycled a lot of Senator Bernie Sanders' talking points from his campaigns, but she's shied away from a lot of the touchy-feely, or how would you describe it?
Well, I guess I should start with a story. In 2020, after her famous Dark Psychic Forces lines, she had kind of a boost, and she went on a tour, a preaching tour, where she preached at various seminaries up and down the East Coast and some in Iowa as well. And one of them was the seminary at Howard University. And I was able to secure an interview with her because, let's be honest, she wasn't a top tier candidate. And it was pretty easy. All you had to do was ask. And when I sat down and talked to her, it was a really odd experience. She's a very smart woman, and very clearly cares about the rot and decay in the soul of America from a left-wing perspective. So her diagnosis of the problem is much different than probably any of ours. But as I was talking to her, she was using all sorts of strange new age words that even I didn't quite understand. Now she's just sort of, as you said, attempting to do a more, I don't know, I would say more hip version of Bernie Sanders, which is an interesting pivot. And back when I wrote the piece, I think she was the only person in the field opposing Biden. That's not the case anymore. I have to wonder, is she going to get edged out by Cornel West, who seems to be, employing a similar strategy, and I assume appealing to a similar sort of person?
Isn't Cornel West running as an independent though?
He is. What is his party's name? Is it the People's Party? I think that might be what he's calling it.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you bring those two people together. Like John and I talk a lot is we're in a populist movement, right? And like we saw this populist wave in our country, towards the end of the Gilded Age. And why does populism tend to rise? It's like Plutarch said, the greatest of all ailments for a republic is the imbalance of the rich and the poor. And so you have this like great boom in the country where you build these great businesses and everybody's kind of growing, and then it kind of goes to balance out and it doesn't balance equally. People get really frustrated, and then you turn to populism, socialism, all these things. And you saw that in the early progressive era, like right around the McKinley era. And now you layer that over what we got going today, it's the same thing. And so that's why we see all of these populist leaders, and you're talking about she's just retreading what Bernie did. And then she's going on a speaking tour, like like she's a preacher. Then that sounds a lot like William Jennings Bryan,
Very much, yeah.
And so it's like these are the same problems that we've had before. And so like I think us as conservatives is like back in the day, Teddy Roosevelt came in and reformed the system. So like conservatives got to start talking about reform and like, putting some checks on these corporations and how they function, because it's really the problem why we have these candidates running.
Yeah, no, I actually think that the reason why I'm interested and why I schlepped down to Union Station to watch Marianne Williamson launch her campaign a couple of weeks ago, I guess months at this point, wasn't really to make fun of her, but because I think she actually is tapping into something very real and describing a real problem. I think she's pretty accurate in pointing out that the way in which the government and businesses interact is really toxic, and it benefits a very small group of people, and really hurts the rest of the country. I think that her solution, though, is it seems almost as impractical as what Brian wanted to do with the gold and silver standard kind of thing. That it's the sort of thing that you notice that a large group of people, the populace, is suffering, and you decide to implement an elite-led solution. That sort of populism, I just don't think is going to last in the end. But it's interesting to see that paradox working.
I mean, it's happened before. I mean, look at FDR after the Great Depression.
Right.
I mean, we kind of leaned into like government support and welfare, and I think that's where a lot of our problems stem from. It's just you've created a massive amount of debt, and haven't done a very good job of paying it off or keeping up with it. But yeah, so like Marianne, she seems, like you said, a little radical, but she really is tapping into something I think is like actually there. And I talk to Democrats or I talk to Republicans, and locally here we have an issue with like data centers, and I was just messaging with a guy today, and he was telling me, we got to get the Democrat to on the ballot, like we got to go vote for the Democrat in the primary, because if we don't get the other person, then our candidate doesn't stand a chance. And,
yeah.
and so I said, why don't you think our candidate stands a chance? She goes, if they face this person, then they'll be drowned out with money. I said, so it's just about the money then? And they go, yes. And, the money comes from a lot from Amazon. We have a board of supervisors candidate locally, Bob Weir. They literally write him checks, even though he doesn't want them, and he donates them to charity. And they like force the money on the candidate. And that's like it's shaping the system and it's controlling the system, and it's completely legal. And it's like, it's insane.
Where's Amazon's office? Is it in Herndon? Like the data center?
The HQ2 is going to go to Crystal City, but some of the big data centers are out in Loudon. Like that's where the original US East one is. And then they've kind of, we know someone who's familiar with some of that. And he just said like they're everywhere. So just because I think, you see a big nondescript building, there's a good chance that it's one of their data centers and one of their operations centers.
Now I've driven out there and looked at that. And I know from someone telling me that this is Amazon country. And how did it happen? How did Amazon get it there in the first place? Why did they choose Loudon? Why not the Maryland side? Why not Fairfax County?
Well, that's the interesting thing with a lot of the data centers is they actually require, as much as we like to think of the cloud as amorphous, there's a huge physical aspect to it.
Yeah.
So at some point, Ashburn was picked. That used to be AOL's headquarters.
Right.
So if you go up like Waxpool Road, just west of Herndon, there is the original or one of the big Amazon headquarter buildings. So there was a tech presence in this area. The land was cheap, and most importantly, you had connection to fiber, and you had connection to some of the big fiber backbones that would go across the country. And then once you've got sort of a nascent infrastructure in place, it's really easy to just kind of build something next door, because all you're doing is digging a hole from one and in your data center under the ground to the next data center,
Right.
plug in some wires, and you got the internet. So I think where we are now is kind of an artifact historically of what happened in the early .coms, at this point, probably 25, 30 years ago. So that's why Ashburn, it's, you've got the fiber connections. Why go anywhere else? Because now you got to lay it, not just build the building, but you actually have to lay the fiber. And,
right.
Interestingly enough, like Facebook and Google, and I think Amazon out on the West Coast, they actually put data centers in like the Oregon desert because it's a lot cooler out there. So it makes sense for them to dig the trenches and bury the cables to get out there, because the economics of cooling are going to be a lot cheaper. But out here on the West Coast, you're just kind of, it's easier to be where everyone else is. So I think that's kind of why Herndon, Ashburn, that kind of area. It's all clay, so it's not really great arable. It's basically you grow houses or you grow data centers out in that area. So I think that's kind of why it is. And then, since you're running out of space, you kind of go south to Prince William County, because they've got open farmland that's available, and they've got some kind of, mostly they've got the utilities. Although that's an interesting dynamic now, where Dominion, the electrical companies, actually doesn't have enough power for some of these data centers. So like it's a weird where we are now, like kind of an inflection point of there's a lot of data centers. They're kind of eyesores. They do bring in tax revenue, but it's really hard to sort of draw that relationship. Like that data center is keeping my property taxes lower.
Yeah. And so you asked, like, how did it get started? And John gave you the Loudoun County beginning, but in Prince William County, like it started during COVID. And so, and a lot of these plans went into place, and the board of supervisors, all of them, both parties, signed NDAs from what I've been told. And like, which seems to me like, isn't that a derelict of duty? If your job is to represent your community, shouldn't you be forced to tell them what is going on? Like, how can you keep that stuff secret? And I think that's where a lot of the frustration locally comes, and is because we just didn't have a say in what happened to our community.
Right. Well, when I hear stuff like that, I wonder, is the political situation out there really that desperate? Or is there something else at play? Is there some other reason why you would, sign an NDA?
I think we've just elected the wrong people, like plain and simple. From talking to them, being in there, the people that are running for office or have been on that board are just, they're there for, I hate to say for profit. I don't know that for sure, but like it sure seems that way from the outside.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not profit, but power.
If I may step in as an elected official that has to go into closed session to talk about land acquisitions, I can kind of see the reason that like they're going to spend a lot of money and they don't want it to leak out that they're going to pick this spot, because then maybe the price will go up, or I can see there's some kind of reason for the NDA. So there's that. But I think that going back to like the dereliction of duty for the elected leaders, it's the elected leaders' job to kind of talk about that and sort of explain like why this is going through. And I know there's a lot of frustration on our local school board about having closed sessions. And I think usually I would say that like it's reasonable to have these closed sessions because it's about legal advice. Sometimes we have to buy land or to not just like a piece of property, but maybe purchase an easement from someone in order to facilitate the school. So I can see the NDA, but that goes back to your point about communication. It's the elected officials, if their communication, their constituents is, well, I can't sign an NDA, I can't talk about it. Like that's bad. Like they should really talk about like, I can't sign an NDA because they're going to buy this land and the deal might go south. Like there's a whole lot of things for it. And this is really better for you. And I think that goes back to Nick, you were saying like, what kind of, are we in a bad political situation? Like there's just not a lot of trust where you don't trust your elected officials to make good decisions for the common good. And I was reading my Blackstone commentaries at the pool. And there was sort of the introduction, they were talking about like, Blackstone's idea, and this is, I think he's reiterating Cicero, of sort of your elected officials aren't necessarily to sort of, sometimes they got to make decisions that people don't like for what they think is the common good. Now, thankfully we're an elected system, so if you don't like what decisions you make, like there is the ballot box where you can get them out. And I guess, if it's a matter of corporate money coming in and flooding the zone and making it hard to elect someone, then that's another problem too.
Yeah. And that's what Marine sees, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And with with so many people who see this problem, once you point it out, you've made it very difficult for you at least to do anything about it, just because the weight of Amazon, for instance, gets pushed against you almost immediately.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, I think back to Teddy, right? Like there's this guy who was a conservative. He was a progressive in a lot of ways. He was part of the elite, of the country as well. But he wasn't afraid to, kind of walk the streets with the people, learn about them, understand what the real struggle was. And he did what our founders were trying to do. He tried to balance the system, right? And it's like, I got a poem out there, and it's like, I say Madison, he's just trying to balance the crooks, right? Because we're all surrounded. They presuppose all these things. You read the Federalist paper, and this is what they talk about. And so it's like, we just stopped doing that. We stopped trying to balance. It's the railroads were this interconnected system that brought us closer together, created new markets of commerce. And so is fiber optic. You're drilling from one point to another, and you're connecting people on a faster level. It created more commerce. It created more wealth. It created more corruption. And we didn't write any rules for it. We didn't curb it. We didn't regulate it. We didn't do our job in the government. And it created, this massive mess. And now you've got the hysterics of the populist leaders trying to take advantage of this, and finding out if they're genuine or real is really difficult. And I think somebody like Marie, when she comes out a little crazy in the first election, now she wants to be serious about her economic policy. People like me go, how can I take you seriously?
Right. Well, and then, since she launched her campaign, I don't know the exact numbers, but there was a story maybe last week or the week before, but, like her 3 top advisors quit because it's not going anywhere. And you can put together a good speech, you can point out real problems, you can crib from Bernie Sanders circa 2016, but if you don't have the money yourself to win the election, it really does seem like it's for nothing.
You got to have the right message. I mean, the money, you've got to have money in the system. Like, it's got to happen. And I'm of the belief that there are virtuous people out there that would pay into money to somebody that had the right message. And I just don't think she has the right message,
No.
and that's why she's not going to be able to get the money. That's part of the problem.
Well, she's too similar too. I mean, there's one thing to point out the problems, but then if your solutions are the same as everyone else's, it's kind of like, well, you did the work, you said what's wrong, and you're just taking my points, and I'm much more well known, so I'm going to take the lead. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Tales old as time. Yeah. Do you guys think that Biden's going to be the nominee, for Democrats?
I think it's too early to even speculate. Like, I mean, and
okay.
I say this respectfully as just a human being who observes people. I worry about his health, right? Like, I mean, if you're asking me to, like, I got to predict how long somebody's going to live at this stage, or be mentally capable. I mean, we always risk the day that he wakes up and he can't remember his name, and he can't go out and do an interview. And the moment that happens, like, there's real problems in the country that they're going to have to address. They can't just put him on the ballot. This is, we can't Woodrow Wilson this situation, lock him away and have his wife run the White House. That's not going to fly in today's, digital age. So it's too hard to say. I hope not. I don't want to see Biden or Trump on the ballot. I want to see 2 fresh faces. I want to see somebody under the age of 60 on the ballot, for crying out loud. Like, somebody that's actually invested in the future of this country because they're going to live longer than 5 years. Like, give me some hope or something,
Yeah.
I would say it's a little too early too. I mean, I think you wait for one of the first primaries to get a good sense. But what was it? Lyndon Johnson, he kind of stepped aside after the first couple of primaries. So I think that would be a key test. But it is kind of weird that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is polling so well when, by all accounts, he would seem as not mainstream at all.
This is what I was wondering. Once it comes down to brass tacks, are people really going to throw their support behind him? I don't know. It'd be really interesting if they did. He doesn't have a voice for public speaking.
I was talking about that with somebody the other day. Is like they were like, I like his ideas, I can't listen to him.
Yeah, it's really odd. And yet he still polls well.
I
I'll be curious to see how that turns out.
I think, and this scares me to say this, but the corruption is so bad that the people might just vote for anybody.
Yeah.
Like just whatever sounds the best, no reason. Like I'm just mad, I'm upset, I'm going to turn your world upside down and I'm going to vote for this person. I kind of feel that's kind of what Trump was. It was a message. It was Andrew Jackson taking hold and changing the power in Washington. I think Trump just didn't handle it very well. He wasn't as virtuous as Andrew Jackson was, and now you have the chance for it to happen again. And that's the scary part when you have these populist movements: is who do the people vote for?
Well, yeah, I'm trying to remember who says this, but the with populist movements in general, it seems that the candidate who comes out, as the leader, is basically reflective of the virtue of the people.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get a candidate like Trump, say what you will about his presidency, it's had its ups and downs, but a candidate in 2016, it was sort of distressing representation of the virtue of the country.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. It was a little distressing.
Yeah, and yet we're lucky that the system works the way it does. We're not entirely dependent on the virtue of our candidates for governance.
Yeah.
And I could say, Trump had his vices, but I think the interesting thing is so did his opponent. So
right,
you can't just blame it as well because he won and he's got these vices that automatically reflects the country. It was a weird situation where his opponent at the time also had her own problems, and I think you could easily say like maybe people were voting more against those problems than sort of the unknowns.
right.
Especially if it was the corruption and insider dealing, not necessarily being on his third or fourth marriage, and kind of more below the belt vices rather than just the real intellectual dishonesty and holding multiple thoughts at the same time and trying to lie to people.
Right.
Speaking
of, this is the artful pivot.
Nic, you wrote another article we were going to talk about, and why don't you tell the people a little bit about the person you were kind of profiling?
Okay. So let's see. I guess we'll start at the end. Robert Hanssen died earlier this week. He, I believe, still holds the record for most state secrets sold to the Russians, or at least most assets of the U.S. People either killed or imprisoned at the hand of the Soviets. Before he was arrested, he was weeks away from retirement, something like that, something absurd. He very nearly got away with it in 2001, and it would have been the biggest story of the year. In any case, I wrote a review of a new book on him from last year. And the book itself was whatever. The case has been rehashed a million times at this point. But what I wanted to focus on was a curious position that a lot of people who work in government find themselves in, and people all over find themselves in this position too, where you develop a sort of Superman complex where good and evil exists, and there are forces of good and forces of evil in the world, but you stand outside of it all, almost as an observer, and dip in every now and then to make decisions that you believe are right and expedient for whatever good you're trying to achieve. And this ultimately ends in madness, because you can't hold two opposing ideas in your head and believe both of them to be true forever. But you can you can do it for many decades, which is what Hanssen did when he was on the one hand working for the FBI and on the other selling secrets to the Russians. He genuinely, I think, believed he was doing both things for the common good, which is a really tricky situation to get yourself in. But I think we all end up there, on our worst days. Anyway, that was what the piece was about.
Yeah, I mean, I found that thought process interesting. This idea that you hold these two different lines, these two different thoughts, and you talk about it in this like intellectual way. It's like this is a sign of high intelligence and reason, but reason lacking morals is, chaos or unreasonable. And I think people like this. I think what they do is they rationalize like the good and the bad of what they accomplish. And they say, well, if somebody else was doing this, if I wasn't doing this bad thing, somebody else would be in this position doing something worse. And therefore I'm lessening the bad thing. And therefore it's a net good for society. And I'm a good person still. But in reality is like you mentioned, Superman complex, good and evil. Who gets to decide what's good and evil? How does one person get to make those decisions? And should you have that much power in any aspect of your life? Because power corrupts. Like it's a known fact of society and life. And no matter how good you are, we're all imperfect and we're all susceptible to that. And I think maybe our government, our FBI, or maybe we should rethink about how we do these spying things and putting people in these positions to be corrupted in this way.
Yeah, the one thing that really got me about this specifically is Hanssen was I think he said at one time that his favorite book was The Way by Jose Maria Escriva, which is an odd favorite for someone who's going through this, because Escriva's whole point in The Way is that ultimately you're not the master of your fate, God is. And you sort of have to be humble before that, and more than that, before mentors and leaders in your life who can give you advice and can tell you, no, you're not Superman. You can't decide good and evil. And that that in a book that I'm sure he read many times, missing all of that, to me is very strange. I don't think that answers the question of how can we solve this at a large governmental level. But I do think that there's something to be said for when you're working in government, especially in DC, surrounded by people who are all kind of thinking the same way as you and going through the same modes. It becomes very easy to be caught up in your own bubble of one, while you're surrounded by many other people who are also in their bubble of one. So I don't know, maybe we should send the FBI out to Cleveland or something like that.
No, you got to send them to Northern Virginia, where they.
Yeah, that's right.
We've got an FBI building in Prince William County already. So, but I mean, I don't think that's actually a terrible idea. I mean, in all aspects of like society, when government becomes, power becomes centralized, the best way is to decentralize it, spread it out, spread it away from each other, and put it down where there's more people in the system holding each other accountable, and then,
yeah,
like, as far as like, I think our national rot, is the military industrial complex, or the policing of America that happened after World War II. And then, well, I would say the military industrial complex after World War II, and then the policing of America after 9/11. Okay. Is like, we have this, I'm not going to call it a surveillance state, but you feel like it is at times. And so, the key is like, again, we concentrated all this power. It's not regulated properly by Congress because, as John and I talk about a lot, there's not enough people in Congress to actually regulate these things. There's nobody actually like paying attention. They don't have the time. There's only 435 of them, and there's 330 million, and there's all these new agencies that didn't exist the last time they raised the number of people in Congress. They've been given all this new responsibility, and they just don't have enough time. So, yeah, build another Congress, put it in Kansas, right? Move, have 870, 435 here and 435 there, and then spread out the DOD, the CIA, and everything all across the country, and allow them to like be held accountable, and set some guidelines for how we interact in foreign nations with spying. There should be some basic decorum that we should do. I don't necessarily know that we're asking our agents to do the right things all the time. Maybe we're putting them in the positions to make them think that they have this much power when we shouldn't be granting them that, because it's not our decision to do that.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a weird jurisdiction aspect too with the FBI too, because they're more domestic and the CIA is more international. So that is the weird thing where obviously there's deeper infiltration if the Russians are concerned about the domestic policing agency, as opposed to like the CIA, which you would assume would be the ones inside Russia trying to figure out what's going on behind the steel curtain.
Yeah, that actually plays into the Hanssen story directly. Prior to him, I'm forgetting the name of the guy who was arrested maybe 5 years before for the same thing. He worked in the CIA. He lived in Northern Virginia. He sold the secrets at my local bar, actually. Place called Mr. Smith's. But for years, the CIA and the FBI were looking for the mole, and they were convinced that it had to be in the CIA because, why would the FBI, why would a leak be coming from the FBI to Russia? The CIA makes much more sense for that venue. Anyway,
Oh, interesting. Oh, that is interesting. That was the miscommunication between the
right. Yeah, and it's actually the reason why he was not caught earlier, because all he did was he knew how to get around the FBI's mainframe. He knew how to use the internet, and many of the other older agents did not. It was the early 90s, and it was often just as simple as going in the back end of a website and downloading something, which anyone can do now. But I guess in 1995, this was a very novel thing.
There weren't enough pipes in the ground in Ashburn to get that all working.
Yeah, that's right.
bring it all together.
No, but it is true. Just the fact that we do ask a lot for public servants sometimes. I mean, I know a couple of family members who are involved in various agencies, and it isn't. It's incredibly common where I would say not that they live a double life, but they do have two lives: a work life where they solve important problems, complicated problems for our country, and then they come home and they can't say a word about it.
Right.
And my father in particular, like, he worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, and I had no idea what he did. They had this summer program where you could come in and kind of like work at the agency, was sponsored by your parents. So that was really cool because I actually got to see his desk, and that was about it. Like, he kind of showed me around, and he's like, okay, so don't look over there. You can't look at those posters, and this is kind of where I work. So like, it's just, I would say, a father can come home and talk about what he does, and my dad just was kind of like, well, I'm a project manager in the U.S. government, and so it is. You can definitely see how that kind of work would lead to the kind of compartmentalization where, in one end, you are the Superman of the agency, solving problems, finding mainframe problems, and maybe telling people about them, and they don't listen to you. So now you're going to prove them right and say, like, look, it's so easy to steal state secrets.
Which is how it started, actually. And oftentimes he would like show off and like fix things for people, fix things for the FBI because he could. And then, would also sell secrets on this. But it seems to me that the intelligence community is in a bad spot, where I think everyone's natural assumption, like if you told me my dad works for the CIA, the first thing I would think is, oh, he probably does something immoral, which is like generally not true of a lot of these people. But like,
but I can't tell you,
right? Yeah, who knows? But like the very fact that like that's what most people immediately think when someone says, yeah, I work for the FBI, you know, or even like I work for the IRS. People think like, oh, you're doing something horribly immoral over there. And maybe they are.
But yeah, I mean, you make a very good point and I think it's the way that it's portrayed. It's the stories that we're told, right? Like we're only told certain stories. We don't get told the good stories of where all the things that happen and whatnot. I mean, and you hear these bad things and they sound really bad. And then it may touch you in your life somewhere and you go, how could this have happened? I can't believe that. And now it's just the only voice that you're hearing. And so it becomes, you talked about that. Everybody's living their own like bubble. Now that bubble is spread on everybody and they're seeing the same thing. So um, need more virtue in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I guess that's the parenting part of the podcast, right?
Yeah, I mean, really, I mean, actually, today, so I have twin 6-year-olds. I've got 5. John's got me beat with 7, but I've got twin 6-year-olds, and Sadie, my one of the twins, she's what I call an active communicator, and active communicators are active liars.
Yeah.
Eleanor is a passive communicator, and passive communicators are silent liars. Okay, and so today I came downstairs. Vanessa and I, it's been long week. We slept in, we overslept, we missed church. We come downstairs, the kids, up with their older brother, and they've gotten breakfast and everything. And I kind of smell bacon and eggs. And I go, did your brother make you bacon and eggs this morning? No, we had cereal. And that's what Sadie said. I said, you didn't have any bacon? No. Well, later in the afternoon, because Eleanor doesn't answer, I just accept Sadie's answer because there's no reason for me to assume that she's lied. So I don't want to make her feel like I think she's a liar. Later in the evening, Vanessa and I are talking about bacon. We're like, where's the bacon? The bacon's gone. And so I turned to Eleanor. I said, did you eat bacon this morning? And she goes, yep. And I go, where was that answer this morning when I asked you? And she goes, Sadie answered. I didn't answer. And I said, but you knew the answer and you stayed quiet. And that's a quiet lie. And quiet lies aren't good either. You got to be able to stand up and tell the truth, even if somebody else is lying, because that's important in holding your sister accountable so she makes good decisions. And I think we need to teach that, like in our society. Like we should teach that to our kids. We should teach that to our public officials. But yeah, it's funny watching kids. They're just little manipulation machines.
Oh yeah. Yeah, my daughter's not old enough for that quite yet. But when I put her to bed, it's just every single stuffed animal in the house. She's asking for it to be brought to her. I have to cut it off at a certain point.
Yeah. Well, they learn, they're taken care of. And so it's almost like they think they're in charge, when they transition from stage to stage. It's like, no, give me
that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's that Superman complex again. Well, it's
that's right.
It's the sins of omission and the sins of commission. It's like the omission is when you don't say anything, and then the commission is when you're actually committing it. So that is what is it? It's that's the theology for practical wisdom of how that all works.
Yeah.
But no, I mean it is good to teach. Not only is it just telling an outright lie, but being part of a bigger lie and not stepping forward, like that is just as key. And I do agree that that's something that you want to instill in your children as they get older. That truth telling is also what you allow to go by and not say anything about. And you could say that you could translate to the political sphere where, just because you don't agree with the policy or something, that might not be a big deal, but if it's something that's could be morally wrong, like you do have a need to stand up against it and say something, or make it less worse if you can, or something like that. So I think that it starts at a young age and it continues throughout your entire life.
Yeah.
Yeah, like signing an NDA when you're supposed to inform people of what's going on.
Right back where we started.
Well, Nic, this was great. I really appreciate you joining us. How can people find you?
Well, you could Google me, I guess. I'm on Twitter at Nic Extempore, but I do not tweet very often. You find me on the lampmagazine.com.
Lampmagazine.com.
Yeah.
John, anything to leave the people with before we get out of here?
I would just admit that I'm a Lamp subscriber. I love it, and if you're interested in Catholic culture that isn't like too terribly religious, what would you say, Nick? It's like it's not all about Catholicism, but it's sort of it's moral and it's just fun.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I think about it is we are uppercase C Catholic, but we're also lowercase c Catholic. We want anything interesting, anything good, we want it. That's our MO.
Well, this week you might have noticed I got my Matt Lewis mug. John and I went to his How to Be a Pundit class last year, and I'll be going again this year. It's on Wednesday at the Leadership Institute. He'll be hosting it with Stephen Kent. You can go online or you can go in person. You can register at the Leadership Institute if you're interested. I'd be happy to see you there. We also have a couple Madisonian events coming up soon. On July 8th, we are having a big Madisonian small business showcase at Great Maine Brewery in Haymarket, Virginia. It's going to be from 12 to 6. So come out and join us. You can RSVP on our website. And then on July 24th, we're also having a Madisonian dinner where you can come out, sit down with the team, and just ask questions, talk about politics in a small, intimate setting. Space is limited on that one, so make sure you RSVP. Again, you can find that on our website at MadisonianRepublicans.com. And as always, peace and love.